The Thief Trilogy is a series of games developed by Looking Glass Studios and Ion Storm. Created right at the start of the 3D boom in the late 90s, they were highly influential in the stealth and immersive sim genres of video games, thanks to their unique blend of old and new gameplay concepts, film and literary references, and deep historical research. In this series, I'll be discussing the original game along with its re-release Thief Gold, examining all 16 missions in detail alongside a bevy of development tidbits and observations. Let's start with a little history. Thief had a rather protracted development cycle for the time due to various competing ideas and the commercial failure of Terra Nova creating major problems for Looking Glass Studios. The initial pitch for the game had little connection to the final release, titled Better Red Than Undead, which involved an American agent sword-fighting zombies in the Soviet Union during the Cold War. Yeah, really. This never got off the ground, and so the zombies and sword fighting were repurposed for Dark Camelot, a darker take on Arthurian legend. While initially a much more manageable concept, beginning pre-production in April 1996, for the most part this also didn't get very far since the sword fighting wasn't working well, and there was a lot of scope creep due to the engine being developed concurrently with the game. There's a lot of misconceptions around Dark Camelot as some elusive finished iteration we never got to see, but it's more accurate to say that Thief evolved organically from this as the team was overhauled through production. Any tech demos, art assets, level concepts, and most especially world-building ideas that were created were retooled for the new direction. As was typical of Looking Glass, what was initially meant as a simple, action-focused game instead spun out to something wildly ambitious and experimental.
Note that basically our gameplay revolves around you playing the character of a thief. And what makes the gameplay distinctive from other games that we've seen is instead of having a giant bazooka and just going off and killing everything in sight, the gameplay revolves around you using stealth and concealment as a tool.
While Thief ended up as their best-selling title, it was a huge risk at the time since there really weren't that many mainstream stealth games. Keep in mind, Metal Gear Solid released just 2 months before Thief, and Hitman didn't get going until Looking Glass already closed down. Even today, though, a specific focus on stealth and avoiding combat rather than engaging with it is not common in mainstream AAA games unless we're talking perhaps the survival horror genre. While I don't want to venerate this period of game development as nebulously better than current, even in the 90s there were some pretty horrible crunch conditions forcing workers to sleep in the office to help meet deadlines. There's an unmistakable spark to ideas here as developers were eager to push what the mainstream could be defined by, which has been sanded down by corporations to facilitate art that is a master of nothing. While I quite love the creativity of indie games and highly recommend ImSims such as Filcher, Gloomwood, Hexcraft Harlequin Fair, Cruelty Squad, or hell, some of Thief's own fan campaigns like Shadow of the Metal Age or The Black Parade, it's frustrating contrasting projects which have minimal to no budget with mainstream titles saddled with some of the worst excesses of the games industry. The fact it's become expected for a AAA game to ship and workers to get laid off regardless of success is absurdly horrible, and I feel terrible for any creative person driven to give up on their dreams because of that exploitation. The work is important, but it's not valued. To that end, I'll do my best to highlight the contributions made by as many individual developers of Thief as I can, since nothing anywhere else will ever play, look, or sound like Thief does, and the effort put to have things be that way deserves respect. Alright, let's start the game. On boot up, you're treated to a steampunk-inspired menu, with only atmospheric sounds playing. Scrolling down to the intro option plays the opening movie. There's some important themes and concepts here that we won't get into until much later, but take note of this tasty direction. Was the cutscene director for Thief, and was influenced by a wide variety of film, paintings, and even anime, which comes across in the visual presentation and shot composition. Notice how this figure in the background slowly zooms in, alongside the intercutting of Garrett's activities. Note also the text and symbols being overlaid on top with continuous animations in the letterbox. All this together indicates that the texture of the world itself is important to understand the complex relationships and history baked into the game's setting. And the surreal vibe was strong enough to also affect the ways in which levels were being designed, since every element of the game was being iterated and developed in tandem. I love it to pieces. With that done, we can start a new game. In some truly innovative tech from 1998, you can skip the tutorial mission if you so wish and just get right into the thick of it with Lord Bafford's Manor. Obviously, we're not going to do that, but the fact that something as basic as this is not implemented in a lot of mainstream games to this day is pretty wild. Anyway, let's start with the Keeper's training. This cutscene establishes Garrett, played by the always great Stephen Russell, along with the Keepers.
I was a kid. No parents, no home. Running messages and picking pockets to keep my ribs from meeting my spine. One night I saw a man. Folks just passed him by like he wasn't there. I thought he must have something valuable, so I snuck up on him and made a grab.
That's not for you.
Please, sir, I'm hungry. Don't tell the Hammers, I promise.
What is your name, boy?
Garrett.
You have talent, lad.
Let go of me, old man!
To see a keeper is not an easy thing, especially one who does not wish to be seen. We have a need for those as gifted as yourself. If you've grown tired of how you live, then follow me, and we will show you a different way.
Leave me alone!
As you wish.
I caught up with him just before he vanished into the crowd. It was the beginning of a very long education.
An important idea establishes the concept of balance versus passion. The Keepers seek to maintain balance in the world by acting as a neutral third party to conflicts, while Garrett, by nature of him being on the streets, is passionate to change his situation. Thus, it is Garrett here who is the agent of change rather than the Keepers, but the Keepers maintain a position of power and authority over him due to knowledge from ancient texts, with Artemis giving instructions to Garrett from high above, surrounded by books with the clacking of marble.
Welcome, young Garrett. In the nearby rooms, I will instruct you in the various skills you will need to survive. Please stay in the entrance area to each room while I explain the room's purpose. When you are ready to begin your lessons, proceed down this hallway to the first room.
Throughout this mission, the Keepers are always framed as above Garrett, with him needing to rise to their level, and it's only at the very end where Garrett regains his agency of something familiar, but that's jumping ahead a bit. It's important to note there's 4 different versions of the game, with 3 versions of the Dark Project, and 1 version of Thief Gold. Only the very first release, 1.14, has a painting here, depicting the trickster being defeated by the Hammer, the Master Builder. I find this omission pretty interesting, but it shows up so often in other levels that they probably felt it was redundant. While I'm here yapping, I want to illuminate a few of those development tidbits. For the sake of coverage, Thief had a mountain of unused dialogue, some of which is referenced in the game's schema, basically loose scripting documents used to determine what an actor should say in a given situation. Artemis has an unused line that was meant to play if you sit idle in this room for 20 seconds.
Come on, son. Proceed with your training. If you wish to hear the instructions again, tell me.
Despite never being visible, if we use a fly sheet or level viewer, you can see that Artemis has a defined path he uses to walk around the room. And hey, some of the textures even look kind of right. Anyway, the next area introduces the shadow and light mechanic, indicated by the light gem in the bottom center of the screen. The developers had some debates over the gem since it's a little artificial, but it was kind of necessary in order to disambiguate why you're being spotted. I would say the issue with this tutorial is it implies that becoming visible at all is the same as being spotted.
I see you there, lad.
Try again. Remember, stay out of the well-lit areas until you reach the platform.
When in actuality, more complicated AI such as guards use various awareness states based on what they see and hear. If you mess around a bit, you can notice how the Keeper actually has a cone of vision, letting you be in the light on the edges without getting spotted.
Well done. I did not see you approach.
The sound tutorial, by contrast, has a little more granularity to it, since whether you can be heard or not is based not just on the surface you're walking on, but how fast you're moving.
I could hear that.
Try again.
Very good. I did not hear you traverse the room.
I must say, I really like the look of these areas, really tall structures which cast down shadows onto everything below. It makes you wonder how old the Keeper compound is, and how many generations have been trained in these halls. Next is the combat course, testing Garrett's skills with his sword and bow. It's a little more freeform thanks to being set outside, with no fail states like before. Also, I really love how early 3D games use rotating models for stuff. It's really cute. I miss it. Anyway, starting with the bow, the actual properties of it are pretty excellent. There's enough weight to the animations, and the way the arrows arch in midair simulates real life well. I especially love the detail that Garrett will start straining and eventually retract the bow if you hold him taut for too long. As a carryover of earlier iterations, the sword has a few unique properties, such as the swing direction being dependent on where you are targeting an enemy. I will say, it's pretty understandable why they moved away from this being a central mechanic, since the swordplay, while functional, doesn't provide a particularly varied gameplay experience. Once you're done sparring with your buddy, you're able to pick up some items to introduce the item inventories. You can think of this system like the A-B buttons in Zelda, with your weapons usable with a left click and everything else usable with a right click. It can be pretty easy to have things overcluttered, so get used to mapping hotkeys for things you use a lot. If you're fast, you can grab the key here and rush down the nearby hallway to unlock a secret basketball court, which, in addition to letting you shoot some hoops, also has a bedroll of developer quotes on them. Notably, this area is only available on expert difficulty, elsewise there's a wall blocking the way. Another exclusive to 1.14, there's a zombie head on this post right here. Considering the faux controversy over Doom in 1993 and the lack of zombies in the demos, I suspect the devs were playing things a bit carefully and downplayed elements like this, which is very funny if you know where the story of the game is going. We're not quite done here, since now we have some glitches to do to show off some interesting quirks. The game was careful to lock doors as soon as you got your weapons to prevent you from messing with the keepers, but it's still possible to get back over there through use of gentle clipping, done by crouching, leaning, and then jumping to go through thin barriers. This can be pretty finicky, often leaving Garrett trapped in walls, but with enough persistence he can get through. The keepers can be killed without much consequence or reactions, as they're programmed to not be hostile under any circumstances. You can even kill Artemis, with his voice opting to train you from beyond if you continue this Doom timeline.
You aren't playing by the rules, young one.
It's also possible to get out of bounds in the courtyard if you manage to mantle onto the nearby legend roof. This lets you see some untextured geometry in the bounds of the skybox. Like a lot of older games, the skybox is projected onto flat planes rather than wrapping over the level, which looks pretty interesting. Anyway, all that remains is the obstacle course itself. It's very short and to the point, perhaps inspired by the one in Tomb Raider 2, and once you clear it, the mission's all finished. Well, almost.
The keepers were training me to be one of them, but I found other uses for those skills.
This is a defining character moment for Garrett, which sets up his character arc through the trilogy. Despite being helped in his most desperate hour, Garrett more than anything looks out for himself over other people, leaving it no surprise that he would return to a life of thieving once gaining valuable knowledge. We won't learn for a while the exact context of their falling out, but it's implied here that Garrett is the type of person who wants to be in charge of his own destiny rather than rely on the words of others. One last 1.14 difference is these statues, which were mysteriously removed in later versions, perhaps not to distract from the item you're encouraged to steal. The 3 doors in this hallway are locked, but you can force them open with a conveniently placed plant, revealing there to be nothing but stone behind them. Obviously this is an unintended bug, but you can headcanon it as the Keeper's messing with Garrett if you so wish. Overall, A Keeper's Training is a mostly well-designed tutorial level, helping to establish key themes and gameplay concepts in as efficient a manner as you can ask for. While I obviously took it slow here, there's nothing stopping you from blazing through everything in 2 minutes flat if you want. One can only hope tutorials could be this good in the modern day.
First, climb a rope and check the move while looking up or down.
Lord Bafford's Manor is what many consider the first real mission of the campaign, and if you opted to skip the tutorial is your exposure to Thief on the whole. Introductory levels are often very difficult to do, since you need a space that is approachable to newcomers while hinting at later gameplay and story complexities down the road. Every mission in the game from here on also starts with a briefing, providing some basic information on the setting and your goals in an appropriately moody and atmospheric way.
The front gate of Lord Bafford's Manor is always guarded, and the main street is far too exposed. But Cuddy tells me there's a better way in, around to the side, more out of the way. One guard, and likely no witnesses to complicate matters. The piece Cuddy wants is a scepter, silver, jewels, the usual adornments. It should command a high price. Bafford, like most of his kind, probably keeps his treasures on the top floor of the place, close to his heart, and far from his servants. No point in waiting. I have Cuddy's old sketches of the place, and everyone who's going to be asleep inside already is. It's time to begin.
We're then presented with the difficulty selection and loadout screen. The tutorial alluded to this, but difficulty selection is more than just damage modifiers, and takes after GoldenEye for the Nintendo 64 by modifying mission objectives along with tweaks to guard numbers, item locations, and the availability of shortcuts. For this mission, the three biggest modifiers are the loot requirement, the restriction to not kill people, and the need to get back out of the manor once collecting the scepter. These objectives help give a sense of Garrett's priorities and morality. While you're of course the one in control of Garrett, how he reacts to specific situations is pre-authored, which is an interesting dynamic.
I wonder if he reads them or if it's just for show.
For science, I went ahead and collected all the loot in every mission on Expert to help explore the limits of the game's design. This ended up being a pretty big mistake, but we'll talk about that as we go. This mission has a total of 1429 loot, with 700 needed to finish, meaning you need about 49% of all the valuables in the level. After you pick a difficulty, you're then presented with the loadout screen. Money from one mission doesn't carry over past the next, so it's a good idea to spend everything you have. The only difference with Garrett's starting loadout between difficulties is the amount of water arrows, although personally I think 8 is more than enough to start with. Alright, let's start the level. Immediately you're presented with 4 directions to go, but let's just see what's right in front of us.
Hey, I'm going to the bear pits tomorrow. You want to come with? Couldn't pay me enough. What? You soft belly. The bears have got these new muzzles with underslung cheek spikes. Last time I was there was a real eye gouging.
As a way to both guide the player and provide story tidbits, the designers use a variety of methods including overhead conversations, which are often interlinked with context clues in the environment. Since these missions are so open-ended, the writing often needs to account for the player potentially missing details in one area that requires reiteration in another without feeling repetitive. I'm reminded of the thought process behind Disco Elysium's writing, with writer and lead designer Robert Kurvitz facing the problem of the player potentially not understanding the stakes of a given situation unless it's reiterated multiple times.
The main thing to understand about text is that people don't understand text. They don't understand what you're telling them unless you've told it to them 2, 3, 4, sometimes even 8 different ways. But if you do not understand what is happening, then it's not interesting to you. If you just give them a situation, quite often people just gloss over it or retention problems happen.
Now, if you've played the game before, you might be experiencing a bit of a Mandela effect since you were expecting Garrett to say a line here. You know, this one.
A few too many to try to get by here.
Well, this line and many others is the result of changes made by T-Fix, an outdated patching tool which updates the game's engine to New Dark and installs fan modifications which attempt to restore unused content and make adjustments to the level geometry. The problem here is that the main installer obfuscates how much it is actually changing, leading to people installing modifications they're not given the option to disable unless they just know to use the light version. While it's fine to prefer some of the added audio and stuff here, it's important to recognize it doesn't really reflect the intent of the original developers. I don't mean any shade on the creators who contributed to T-Fix, since it was clearly made with a lot of hard work, but I recommend folks use Rogue Patcher in the future for an experience closer to the original release. Anyway, beyond the bear pit conversation just being funny, it also draws attention to how well guarded the entrance is. You can attempt to fight the guards to get in, but it's extremely tough, especially on higher difficulties. There's a meme of Sims having skips with boxes you can stack, and I think that's a good barometer since even if there's a clear intended path forwards, you can find an alternate route if you're persistent enough. But alright, let's not brute force it and try a different way. If we crack open a map, it's pretty clear the only way forward, at least to Cuddy's knowledge, is through the well. We can confirm this by going north just to be certain. The streets winding to the well have some alternate paths, one of which has some easily missed loot through the sewers. You can also grab the hidden arrow cache that's marked on the map as well.
How's it going?
Notably for the time, there's some areas within missions in which your presence doesn't arouse suspicion. We'll see some iterations on this later on, and it was certainly an influence on the social stealth concept the Hitman series is known for. Funny enough, in the original release, guards don't react if you're carrying around bodies, which was patched for obvious reasons.
How's it going? Wait! Stop at once and put them at you!
Anyway, you take this guard's key, then descend into the waterway. There's a small secret path leading to a cave with spiders that varies by difficulty, and a ring worth 100 gold. But elsewise, you proceed linearly and enter the manor proper.
Inside at last.
But I've been thinking we should watch the outsides more.
That's stupid. People to worry about there on the inside.
No, then you catch them before they get inside, you taffer.
Oh!
Since killing people is out of the question, for most missions, Garrett's blackjack is your main tool to eliminate patrols and make things easier for yourself. So long as a guard hasn't spotted you, it's enough to hit them once and knock them out, although you need to be very careful not to let them drown or shoot them with arrows or whatever, since that would obviously kill them. What's fun about the blackjack is it's not tied to any sort of pre-made knockout animation like is common in modern games, which gives you a lot of control over your positioning and whether you want to commit. The game even keeps a tally of how many people you knock out while airborne, which is just great. This whole basement area functions as the tutorial to guards. There's no loot here, and if you get spotted, the way out is separated enough from the rest of the level that you should be able to hide again and mitigate damage. There's lots of rooms to hide in, and some testing of surfaces you can walk on. If you're observant, you can also note through a window a room that you can't reach yet, with a key prominently displayed. I want to take a note here of the music that's been playing. Composed by Eric Brosius, there's a strong horror vibe to everything, which I find super interesting. There's even little musical singers that play when you enter certain rooms. It's very well considered. Once past here, you enter the servants' quarters, which is mostly devoid of loot, but it does allow for multiple routes into the main sections of the manor. Something that's extremely easy to miss here is a conversation between two of the servants discussing the river.
I swear, I've never seen the river this low.
Drought 12 years back, that was
You
almost
can nearly
bad
walk
as this.
across up at Shellbridge.
Wouldn't Newmarket love that?
Now, the reason it's so easy to miss this conversation is due to the trigger for it being rather large, making it so it starts as soon as you ascend the stairs from the basement. This is definitely a mistake, seeing as how most players are naturally going to check the chests by the wall before moving on, and the actual room itself is pretty far away from you. You can alternatively enter from the kitchen area if you happen to go through the main entrance, in which case it'll start once you enter the corridors. One more thing of note is this particular servant, who has a fairly lengthy route through the level that will usually go completely unnoticed by most players. Using the game's editor DromEd to turn off AI awareness, or by killing all the guards out front, we can follow him and see that he walks through the kitchen into the room where these two servants are. This fella is actually kind of glitchy, as he'll alert to seeing bodies or a sword, but doesn't have any defined places to run away once he reaches this room. In terms of design, his purpose is to alert the servants here if you happen to knock out the chef in the kitchen and fail to hide his body.
Oh no! Help! Help!
This is a good opportunity to discuss how the game's AI functions, as it's why Thief is an immersive sim and not just a stealth game. To try to keep it simple, AIs in the game attempt to simulate various awareness and alertness states based on what they notice through sight and sound, which is then processed via an information pipeline to elicit an appropriate reaction. Since Thief has an audio system which accounts for a room's size along with granularity of its vision system, this becomes a complicated process. Combine this with AIs being able to share information with each other and having different defined behaviors, and it's more than possible to create a chain reaction depending on how big a splash you make. This system was created due to a very late-stage rewrite by lead programmer Tom Leonard, who had failed to realize the depth of the problems from the codebase he inherited during the transition away from Thief as an action game, which meant it wasn't ready until 5 months before the game was to go gold. No, not that one. It's honestly a miracle the game came out with that kind of time pressure, let alone having a system as intricate as this. That's not to say there aren't exploitable flaws with it, but in terms of its goals, it more than excels. Now let's continue with the rest of the first floor. The scepter is located in a room to the east, and there's multiple valid pathways to get there thanks to how the areas are connected together at the central pool room. The guards here are fairly simple to avoid, either with clever movement or by snuffing out torches with water arrows. Areas of particular interest would be this room of paintings, which are sourced from real life, just compressed into beautiful crunchy textures. There's also a back entrance you can open for a quick escape. Reaching the second floor can be done either by going through the towers to the north and south, or by taking a risk and trying the staircase near the entrance. The second floor is where things become a bit more challenging with more narrow corridors and loud tile which can alert patrols. Hard and Expert mode add 4 more guards to this floor, although their patrol routes are fairly isolated so long as you stay away from the guard posts. There's a few interesting readables in the North Library and down the staircase to Bafford's counting room. From there, it's possible to gather that Bafford has some shadier dealings going on, including running gambling dens which the Hammerites have raided. There's also a note of trying to dig up dirt on someone named Victoria, and his accounting log shows he pays quite a lot to a person named Ramirez. Hey, same room as before, neat. The room to the south has another painting of the Master Builder and Trickster, and an incredibly evil ring placement on the nearby shelf. Proceeding further leads to some valuable loot in Bafford's bedroom and dining hall, and the door to the inner sanctum can be opened if you're able to grab a key from one of the sergeants, or use the key from the counting room. I really like the use of carpeting and tile here, letting you use your jumps to get closer without alerting them. There's also a secret entrance behind one of the banners in the North Garden, which is honestly one of the stranger secrets in the series. Like, clearly Bafford installed this for a reason, but why though? Anyway, the final challenge of the level is this last sergeant, and if you're not careful, he can ring one of the gongs and summon help. The easiest way I found to deal with him is to shoot an arrow and hit him when he's distracted, but you can also try dousing the torches if you want.
It's a throne room. How pretentious can you get? Here we go.
As mentioned, normal would end right here, but you need to properly escape on hard and expert. Before we leave though, I think it's worth delving into the mountain of pre-release material and unused content. I compiled a large amount of sources from Thief the Circle, magazine previews, and timestamps within the files themselves, so we have a pretty good idea of what was changed and removed here. Let's start with making some more detailed observations about the level design. Starting with this large city section you can only get to by unlocking the West Gate. While this does have a gameplay purpose as a way to leave, what's odd is how this space isn't used for anything else despite taking up such a large portion of the map. There's no secrets or optional loot, the streets are pretty wide and lacking in detail, and you can't even unlock these two street gates from this side. The sewer system we saw previously also doesn't connect to anything here. It's also odd that Bafford's Manor has a north and west gate, but no south gate. This is despite the two faces having some strong structural parallels otherwise, with the layered towers connected together with walkways, the gardens, and so on. Probably one of the strangest unused spaces would be in the east, where you can see outside of the secret tunnel leading to the throne room how much of the third floor was left unused, lining up perfectly with the guard posts and storage rooms in the west, along with the balconies overlooking the central pool. So, what's the deal? Well, as can be observed from some of the earliest promotional material, Lord Bafford's Manor was the first level to be added to the game, and went through various revisions as different gameplay systems were added over time. Some relevant things to consider is that mantling, guard boundaries, rope arrows, and the training mission weren't in the game until shortly before the beta stage, and so Bafford was initially designed as a tutorial mission without any of those elements. Thief was originally planned to have 20 missions before being pared down to 16 and then 13, with retooled variants of 3 concepts added back in for Thief Gold. That process of paring things down means that what levels that were left would take and repurpose elements so as to not waste them. The earliest versions of the game seem to imply a more open approach to Bafford's Manor, lacking a gate or exterior stone walls, along with a more complex third floor. The briefing cutscene, compiled a month before release, gives some idea as to what this looked like, with the back streets seemingly inaccessible with no north exit from the manor, the streets near the entrance more simplistic, and the 2 street gates appearing to be in different locations. Versions until pretty close to final also have the towers open to the sky rather than being boxed in. The same footage lacks a lot of the carpeting which is present in the final rooms to make sneaking up on guards easier, along with the existence of rope and gas arrows. The Dev Diary makes mention of a cut sewers level, which Tim Stelmack confirms had assets which were later repurposed for the Thieves Guild. So it makes sense that assets from it would also be used for levels like Bafford and the Haunted Cathedral, since making what amounts to connecting hallways between areas doesn't take too long to implement. These seem to be changes made late in development though, since the sewers don't connect to the large city area as I mentioned before, and one of few differences between versions of the level is the removal of this misplaced wall texture on the side of the skybox near the well, directly connected to the east wing of the manor and just above the sewers. Now, while I think the more restrictive routing makes replays of the mission a bit repetitive, I think it ultimately works since it helps to highlight just how much Bafford is projecting when it comes to his wealth. His McMansion is so large it negatively impacts the foot traffic nearby. He's got not 1 but 2 pools and open areas, and the haphazard and often gaudy decorations seem to imply Bafford has little understanding of opulence. Now let's get into the unused text. 2 of the unused readables provide further detail on Bafford's financial troubles, along with more information on Victoria, who appears to be a fence. There's also a few unused tips which tell you about the sewers and how many guards are in the manor. Information like this is dubious in terms of canon by nature of being removed from the final release, so let's just assume this information is correct unless something later that is used contradicts them. I also already brought up some of the unused audio files, and it's possible to reconstruct a lot of conversations by cross-referencing the schema files. For instance, Garrett has dialogue which serves as the tutorial, some of which you can even hear in pre-release footage, which is of course rendered unnecessary when there's already a dedicated tutorial level.
Got it. This door is bolted. There's no way to open it. Locked. I'll need the key to open it. It's locked. I can try picking the lock or finding the right key.
Notably, Thief 2 revived this idea for its first level since it omitted a more dedicated tutorial, with Garrett in the interface giving tips on normal and none on hard and expert. Many conversations allude to things which take place in the basement, such as referring to guards on duty or the kitchen.
Say, where are Hal and Joss tonight?
Didn't you hear? They pulled the basement shift. We probably won't see them for hours yet.
What a crummy lot to draw with a master on vacation.
Better for us then, hey? Well, I should be getting back to the front gate. See you back here in a couple of hours then?
Righto.
These are more than likely remnants of different approaches to the manor, which would also explain why the servant river conversation has such a strange trigger zone. Perhaps in earlier builds he couldn't enter the servant quarters from the basement. With all that said, let's finally leave the level. The west exit is by far the easiest, and you can use the central pool as a fast shortcut, but it's also possible to make a tricky jump in the gardens to get over the wall. And of course, the funniest option of leaving via the front entrance.
Nothing's here. Get the chopper!
While I took to nitpicking a lot of the design here, Bafford's Manor does a pretty great job introducing the fundamentals for the rest of the game. The objectives are clear and easy to understand, and the hints at a larger world in the city do a great job sparking the imagination. Tying things together is Garrett's personality, whose comments really help sell playing as an experienced thief. In the next part of this series, we'll be looking at Crag's Cleft Prison and dive headfirst into very complicated ImSim design. See you then.